as it relates to Alabama basketball is Nate Oats has officially hired his third assistant. And his third assistant for this upcoming season is going to be Chris Fleming from the Portland Trailblazers. Chris Fleming has coached with quite a few different places, and we'll go through his background here in a second. Most recently of the Portland Trailblazers, also with the Chicago Bulls, Brooklyn Nets, Denver Nuggets, before very extensive overseas coaching career. Obviously, this is the third assistant in a row that Nate has hired from the professional ranks, with Ryan Pannone being a guy that was hired from the Pelicans, and then most recently Adams that was hired from the Pistons, right? So we have Adams from the Pistons, we have Pannone from the Pelicans, and then now you have Chris Fleming from the Trailblazers. And a lot of that is because I think that Nate obviously has proven that he runs a pro-style system, so it is a system that I think is very, very similar from an analytics perspective and how he runs his staff perspective to what the NBA is looking for. I think additionally he's proven that his head coach or his assistants get head coaching jobs, right? This is a few assistants in a row that now have head coaching jobs. Nate has 5 guys that have gotten head coaching jobs just in his time at Alabama. Obviously, Brian Hodgson, that's now the head coach at South Florida. You have Charlie Henry, that's still at Georgia Southern. Antoine Petway, that's at Kennesaw State. Ryan Pannone, that just left to go to Arkansas State. And then UTSA, right? You have our guy at UTSA, right? Austin Claunch at UTSA. So Alabama, or Nate Oats, has been able to show, he has 5 guys obviously in head coaching jobs, and has shown that if you're a professional or college coach and you have aspirations to become a head coaching guy, and whether you're an offensive guy, a defensive guy, whatever, Nate Oats potentially has a spot for you if you're good enough, right? So this is a situation where, in my opinion, obviously Nate's having to replace Ryan Pannone, so he was going for a little bit more of an offensive guy. That is the type of coach that Chris Fleming is labeled as. He was considered the offensive guy for the Bulls, for the Trailblazers. He was the lead assistant for the Bulls. He even coached a few games. I believe he was 5-0 during the COVID season when the head coach had COVID, right? So he is a guy that definitely has a ton of experience with a lot of, NBA vets, and with Nate Oats running a program that is geared around how the NBA is from an analytics perspective, but also the talent that we're recruiting. When you're looking at a guy like Taylor Bolbo, when you're looking at a guy like Jalil Bethea, the reason these guys want to come play for Alabama is because these guys have aspirations to play in the NBA, right? When you can bring in assistant coaches and you can say, hey, these assistants had other opportunities in the NBA, but they came to coach for me, right? Or those assistants can say that, hey, I believe in Nate Oats. I had NBA opportunities. I've been in the NBA. I know what that looks like. And here's how we're going to coach you to get you to that level, to get you to where you're ready to go to the NBA. That's a great pitch that not every team is going to be able to go to, right? That's a thing that Alabama is going to have a ton of success with, where Alabama is able to say, hey, our assistant coaches obviously have a ton of college experience, but also have a ton of NBA experience. And that experience allows us to, know that we're placing guys into a position and are having them ready to be in a position to go to the NBA, because that's what most of these top level college talents, that's their aspiration. Whether you're a multi-year college guy, whether you're a one and done college guy, your aspirations are long-term to get to the NBA, especially at the highest levels of Division I basketball that Alabama is. And so getting a guy like Chris Fleming is a huge deal when you're talking about something like that. When you're talking about a coaching perspective, and I will sit down and watch a lot more film. Obviously, he was announced earlier today, so this is more preliminary, looking at where he's been, looking at some of the stuff he's done. I have not had time to listen to any podcasts he's been on, videos he's been on, so just a heads up. We may talk more about him in the future as we're kind of giving a better preview of this upcoming season. But, if we're giving a brief overview of how successful he's been in some of the places, what kind of change he's been able to enact. First things first, you have to talk about the fact that he was the head coach of the German national team for a little bit, and won from his time with the Bros Baskets, which is a German professional club. He won the Bundesliga championship 4 years in a row from 2010 through 2013. That's obviously absolutely incredible. He won their Super Cup from 2010 through 2012 and was also the German Cup winner in 2008 and then 2010 through 2012. He won the Bundesliga Coach of the Year, right? So this is a guy that has a ton of international coaching experience. And one of the things that I thought that was very impressive when you're talking about that, and one of the things that somebody mentioned is the impressive part about him being so successful in the Euro basketball ranks in Germany is that a lot of the top talent actually goes more to Spain or goes to some of these other places, and they're typically not going to Germany, right? Germany is not considered a top Euro basketball heaven, so to speak, for the top talent across Europe, right? The European talent often, congregates more in Spain or congregates more in France. I think there were a couple other places that were mentioned, but, the big thing that was mentioned is that Germany is just not one of the main hotbeds for European talent. So for him to obviously have the success that he had in Germany and fairly quickly, right? Obviously he coached as an assistant. He was a player for the Quackenbrucker TSV for 1994 to 2000, and then he was an assistant for them. He then coached for them for a few years, moved on to the German under-20 team, and then was with the Bros Baskets, which was his most recent or his biggest stint, and then also was the German men's national coach from 2014 through 2017, right? And that was a part of his time. He was the German men's national coach while he was an assistant with the Denver Nuggets, while he was an assistant with the Brooklyn Nets. Then he obviously moved on to be with the Chicago Bulls and then the Trailblazers, where he was last season before being let go, and then obviously working with Nate Oats this upcoming season, right? So he is a guy that has a ton of experience internationally. That's something that I think is really big, because when you talk about how basketball is being influenced, especially even at the NBA level, you see guys like Luka Doncic, you see guys like Nikola Jokic that are doing just incredible things, and a lot of it is because of the way that European basketball is played is just fundamentally different than NBA basketball, and there are things that NBA teams are trying to bring over to the NBA ranks from the European side, and that's something that I think you're seeing in college as well, and that's something where Nate Oats, I think, can see that, and obviously that's something that the other NBA programs saw in Chris Fleming, obviously a reason why they wanted to bring him over from the Euro ranks, bring him over into the NBA. Obviously, it's a more popular, I'm sure it's a higher paying job. It's a more prestigious job to be in the NBA, because the NBA obviously is where the best basketball is played in the world. But it's also just a standpoint of you have a lot to bring when you've played overseas and when you've coached overseas. That's something that Fleming can obviously bring to Alabama, right? And I think that's something that really is something that Nate Oats is going for. It's something that you saw in Pannone, and I think it's not shouldn't be any surprise that a guy like Pannone is replaced by a guy like Chris Fleming, another guy that, again, has that Euro experience, that has that offensive experience, that has that NBA experience. I think that's something that he was kind of looking to replace what he had with what he was looking for, and then be very, very similar, right? They're not going to be the same guy. They're going to have different philosophies on certain things. I'm sure they're going to have different set play calls, etc. But, at the end of the day, Chris Fleming is going to be somebody that's going to be working on the offense. And when you're talking about an offense under Nate Oats has a philosophy, and what they're bringing in is wrinkles to that offense, right? They're not going to bring in a brand new offense. Nate Oats already has that, but they're going to be bringing in wrinkles to what an existing, style and system and offensive philosophy is. And so I think that's something that Chris Fleming is going to be able to bring to us, and I think that's something that's going to be very successful for next season. My early thoughts on the Fleming hire is that it's an incredible hire. I really like the experience that he has overseas. I really like the experience in the NBA he has. I think, from a recruiting perspective, I think obviously being able to go to players and kind of talk through, hey, this is what we have on our staff, multiple guys that have NBA experience and that know what it takes to get to that level. I think that's a really big thing. The other thing that I think it's really big to have a guy like Chris Fleming is, again, just somebody to be able to help bring in wrinkles to that offensive system. I know that Nate Oats' offensive system's talked about a lot, and we were obviously super successful last season and the season beyond, but I do think that obviously bringing in some fresh thoughts and stuff like that is definitely going to be big for us kind of moving moving forward. Obviously, really good. We will see, obviously, as I have time to listen to more podcasts, watch videos with Chris Fleming, I will update, all the listeners as such. That's all we had to talk about today. I know it's a little bit shorter episode. I know we're, a little bit under 20 minutes actually, even for this episode. So I know it is a little shorter, but I wanted to go ahead and get an episode out, before I left for my flight. I have a flight tomorrow morning, so I wanted to try to get this out, get everything edited, and get it up for you guys. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I know I mentioned it last episode, but we've passed 300 subscribers, and it's just been an absolute pleasure to be able to do this for everybody. My plan is to keep it going to it, 2 videos a week as often as possible. I know some of these over the summer are going to be a little shorter just because, obviously some weeks more things are happening than others. As it's available, I do plan to do 2 episodes a week. Please subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Twitter. Again, I will mention if anything happens on Twitter, whether we get another recruit or anything happens, I'll tweet about it down on Twitter. So just follow me over there. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.